I'm here today with Cheryl Miner, author of a new book titled Godly Play in Middle and Late Childhood from Church Publishing. Cheryl is director of the Center for Theology of Childhood, the academic and publishing arm of the Godly Play Foundation. For over 25 years, she has served as co-rector at the Parish of All Saints Church in Belmont, Massachusetts. With a degree in music education from Boston University, an MDiv from Virginia Theological Seminary, and a PhD in psychology from North Central University in Scottsdale, Arizona, Cheryl is also a Godly Play trainer and has been deeply involved in designing the Godly Play Foundation's training models. She lives in Belmont, and you can learn more about a lot of her work at godlyplayfoundation.org. So Cheryl, thanks so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, same here. I mean, you've done so much work that's in alignment with so many of the different platforms that I lead that just couldn't pass up this opportunity to get to know you and get to learn about this new book. So to get started, what else would you like people to know about you than what I kind of briefly mentioned at the beginning there?
Well, that was a pretty good introduction. You know, I have been a parish priest for my whole adult life. I went into parish ministry pretty quickly after graduating from college. And my husband and I are co-rectors at All Saints Church. We met at Boston University as undergraduates and were married shortly after we graduated. Went to seminary together, which is kind of a rare thing. Usually you hear about clergy couples meeting at seminary sometimes or afterwards, but we met before seminary while we were just kids as undergraduates at Boston University. So we've kind of grown up together in the ministry, and we've been together here at All Saints sharing this position, which has given me the freedom and time to work for the Godly Play Foundation. And so I'm really grateful for that opportunity and for what All Saints has given me in terms of, you know, the freedom to kind of pursue some other things on the side. We have a beautiful Godly Play program here at All Saints, which I'm really proud of. And it is a place where we host trainings. And so that's just a little backstory about me. I have two children. My daughter's 32 and lives in London and has a child of her own. So I'm a brand new grandma.
Wonderful.
And she calls me grandmommy. And I have a son who's 27 who lives here in the Boston area. And anyway, so that's just a little bit more about me personally.
Very cool. Very cool. So for people not familiar with Massachusetts geography, Belmont is like right next to Cambridge, you know, which is right next to Boston, you know, so it's all in the basically Boston suburban area. And that's a great place to be.
Exactly. It's been a great place. Yeah. We love being here and it's great.
So before we get into the book, a lot of folks are familiar with Godly Play, but for those who are not, could you give an overview of that effort?
Yeah, so Godly Play grew out of the Montessori movement. Our founder, Dr. Jerome Berryman, was a Montessori trained teacher and went to Italy to work on that part of his life. And while he was there, he met Sophia Cavalletti, who is the founder of the Catechesis of the Good Shepherd, which was part of the Roman Catholic Church, of course, and also uses Montessori principles for Christian formation. And a lot of people don't know that Montessori herself was a devout Roman Catholic, and that all of her schools always had a kind of a chapel and a component of religious education as part of what they did there. And so most people who know about Montessori now and the sort of mainstream don't realize that it had that background as well. So when he encountered Sophia and the work she was doing, he was very intrigued and began to spend a lot of time with her, did the training with her. And then when he came back to the States with his family, he began to develop Godly Play. So Godly Play has been around for over 30 years. We just celebrated the anniversary of his first published book. He's published many since then, but the one that he published 30 years ago is kind of the founding book, if you will. And really the basic principle is Godly Play really believe that children come to us already knowing God, that they have had an experience of God. They may not have any language for it, but they definitely know God. And so they don't come to us wanting to know about God. They want to spend time with us exploring that relationship. And what we seek to give them is a language, right, to talk about that relationship and those experiences that they've had. And we believe the language that is the most powerful for doing that is the language from the Holy Scriptures, and also the way the church marks time and seasons and makes meaning with liturgy. So that's what we do. So if you walk into a godly play room, the environment is a prepared environment, just like a Montessori environment. You'll be surrounded by the stories from Scripture. It's like the Bible exploded in the room, right? And we use three-dimensional materials and other types of materials to present those lessons. So you not only hear the stories, but you can see them. And we find that that's a really powerful way for people of all ages, really not just children, but people of all ages to enter into the story. One of the hallmarks of the program is the way we are wonder with children. Right? So there are no answers given. Like we don't have a sort of concept or something we're trying to teach at the top of the page, like, a sort of transactional kind of approach to education. There's no test at the end to see if they've passed or anything. Instead, we ask open-ended, wondering questions. So the atmosphere is filled with wonder and curiosity and openness, and we hope to really encourage that in children for their whole lives, not just when they're in the godly playroom, but begin that kind of journey of faith with that kind of openness. Sometimes Jerome Berryman calls what we're doing playful orthodoxy, an oxymoron, of course. The idea is that we ground them in who they are as Christian people, with an attitude of openness towards people who are different from us, right? So we can really learn to talk across differences in a respectful and joyful and generous way. So I think it's really a timely thing given the polarization that we're seeing both in the church and in the world right now.
So how many times have people asked you this question? Don't you wish there was a version of this for adults that would get broad play throughout our country?
Absolutely. And a lot of people do use it in intergenerational settings or as a kind of, there's a book out called Graceful Nurture by Rebecca McLean. She's a priest from Arizona. She was the dean of the cathedral there and has done a lot of work since then in various dioceses. But Rebecca wrote a book called Graceful Nurture because she developed a whole series of courses that you can do with parents, to help them understand what godly play is, but also sort of newcomer classes using godly play. So check that out if you're interested in seeing how you might adapt it for adult audiences. Lots of people use it in assisted living, that kind of thing, dementia care places. It's a big thing in care homes in the UK. That's the other thing people don't always know. Godly play is a global movement. Right? It has been translated into many different languages, and it's really all over the world. We like to say it's in every continent except Antarctica. It's good to have goals, right? We'll get there one day.
Well, just the whole emphasis on wonder and asking questions, and that's okay, is counter to at least a fair amount of the religion that we find in our world today. So love to see that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the book. As I mentioned, the title is Godly Play in Middle and Late Childhood. So how did this book come about?
Yeah, so I've been a part of the work of godly play for the last probably 27 years or so. And for a lot of people, in the beginning, Jerome Berryman did not publish. So if you wanted to know what he was up to, you had to go to a workshop that he was leading, and then he would give you a 3-ring binder filled with the curriculum, and that was the only way you found out about it. But early on, a woman from the Disciples of Christ named Sonia Stewart came to one of his trainings and got so excited that she published a version of her own called Young Children and Worship. And it has Jerome's name on it. Jerome Berryman is our founder. But it really only has about 5 of his stories in it. The rest are hers. And they're really geared towards preschool, right? 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. And a lot of people found godly play through that book because it was the only thing published. And so they entered it thinking, oh, this is for young children only. But Jerome Berryman never intended that, right? He really sees this as a as a spiral curriculum that grows with children as they move through early, middle, and late childhood. So for people who don't know, so early childhood would be ages 3 to 6, and then 6 to 9 is middle childhood, and 9 to 12 is late childhood. And so, of course, I was using it here at my parish in Belmont with children all the way up through age 13. But as I went out to do training for Godly Play, I constantly encountered people who didn't really understand that it was meant to really serve children in that way all the way through. And so, whenever I went out, I would talk about my experiences here in Belmont, but I just knew that many people, when they got to about, probably age 7 or 8, would abandon it. Now, some of it is because it gets a little more challenging, right? When the school-age children walk in the door, because they bring all of that with them. And then as they move towards the cusp of adolescence between 9 and 10, right, they become just very stormy people as they there's a poem that I reference in the first chapter of my book called On Turning 10. And it's that melancholy that you see in a 10-year-old's face, right? When they're looking kind of behind at childish things that they still yearn to play with or be a part of, but they think they have to leave them behind and start to become more grown up. And so it's a very melancholy time. And as they come into the classroom, you see it on their faces. I love to tell the story about a little girl named, I'll change her name because I don't want to out her, but let's call her Martha, who came into the room this past summer. But up till now, she had been very engaged and talking with me, and suddenly summer hit and I could barely get one word sentences out of her. And, she turned 10, and my heart just went out to her, and I just walked alongside her all summer. And finally this fall, we've had a little bit of a breakthrough, and she's talking again and sharing with me again. But I think she just walked in the room and thought, well, this is for younger children. And she was very defended against it, right? But I just gently kept presenting the stories and asking her how she was. And she's kind of come over that hump, and she's back and present with me. But, for the average Sunday school teacher, Brian, they're just a mom or dad who's volunteered, right? They raised their hand and said, I'll do it. So when they start to encounter that kind of resistance, they throw up their hands and say, this isn't working, right? So we have to stop doing Godly Play. It's not working. And they go to the parish priest or minister, whoever's in charge, and right now, we're all so hungry for people. We want to keep families happy. We're struggling, especially in the main line, right? That the customer is right. So if people are saying we want something new, then that's what happens. And so they blame Godly Play and they move on. But my experience says if we stick with it, that's when the magic happens, right? That's when it really starts to fly for children, when they get over that hump. And so I write about my experiences in the book and about what I observed. I write about those children like Martha, who walk in the room sort of defended. And I just hope it will inspire people to persevere, to go get training so they know what to do when they encounter that kind of resistance, and to keep at it.
Church staff?
I think it's for Godly Play mentors, whoever they are, whether it's volunteers or Christian professionals. Yeah, it's a good read. It's a quick read, and I write from my heart. It's not super academic. There are some academic portions, yeah, but it's there are a lot of stories. One of the things I have to share with you is that I did a lot of research for the book as well. And I had a research assistant who worked with me, who's a PhD student at Boston College. Her name is Hannah Sutton Adams, so just a fabulous person. And Hannah and I sent out surveys, and we got, over 100 surveys back. And from people who have been using Godly Play all the way through early, middle, and late childhood across the globe. And so I have some wonderful stories, not just my own, of people who've been doing this with amazing success.
Good. So you've kind of alluded to some other godly play books. Could you kind of position this within the series of overall godly play publications?
Yeah. So the first book I always recommend people read is a book called Teaching Godly Play. I have it right here sitting on my shelf. So Teaching Godly Play. I don't know if you can see it. I blurred my background. Yeah. And that's by Jerome Berryman. And it walks you through the basics of a godly play session from beginning to end. There's some preliminary stuff and a little bit of background stuff at the end. But again, this is the one I give people first when they come to me and want to know how to do this. And then we have the Complete Guide to Godly Play, which is an 8-volume collection that has the curriculum in it. And so that's where you'll find the lessons and the list of materials that you'll need to create the environment. And I've worked on that as well. I've been really privileged to be a part of the development of the curriculum. So was there for at the beginning with volume 6, 7, and 8, 2, 3, and 4. I didn't help with, but 6, 7, and 8 I did. And then we went back and revised 2, 3, 4, and 6. And I've been working closely with Dr. Berryman on the revisions. Right now, our project is volume 8. We're revising volume 8. And then, of course, Jerome Berryman has written. He's a prolific writer. So I could list all of his books. And I urge you to just look for them. Church Publishing publishes everything he writes. So they should all be on his website. There's another book I always recommend to people by a UK scholar, Rebecca Nye, called Children's Spirituality, What It Is and Why It Matters. Yeah. Another great read for people who are interested in nurturing the spiritual life of children and their families.
Good. So I'd like to read from a couple of the endorsements of your book. One is from Melinda Winter Bradley, Director of Communication and Training at Faith and Play Stories, which is the Quaker adaptation of Godly Play. She says, a fundamental guide to how godly play can grow with our children on the development journey through middle and late childhood. The book calls us to create spaces for older children to give them permission to play, to wonder, to allow for mystery and big questions. Godly play spaces. So how does this book differ from other ones oriented toward the younger kids?
Well, I wouldn't say that Teaching Godly Play is oriented towards younger kids. It's just a more basic text, right? It's the beginning. It's how you get started. But then it doesn't address some of the specifics of what needs to happen as children move into middle and late childhood and how we as mentors need to be ready to adapt and change as their needs change as they move through those phases of life. And so my book is a great follow-up to Teaching Godly Play, a good companion, if you will, to that book. The book I referenced earlier is really targeted young children in worship to younger children. Mm-hmm. And you can just see it in the way it's presented, and the stories are much sparer in detail. And but in Godly Play, we give people advice about how to manage that. If you encounter a Godly Play story that seems a little too wordy, well, you leave some of it out if the children are 3 and 4 years old, right? You don't need, but mostly we work really hard I think I want to say this because it's important to me. We in Godly Play present scripture, right? We trust that it's a living document, that the Holy Spirit is moving and breathing through it, and trust God and the child, right, to work together to make sense of it. And so we don't edit it, right? We don't take out the hard parts. There are some curriculums out there that say, oh, you should never tell that. That's traumatic for children. And we're like, no, we don't do that. Instead, what we do is present it and say, well, I wonder why it happened like that. I wonder if it could have happened a different way. I wonder one time I was with a group of children who were fussing at me about Jesus dying on the cross, a basic part of our faith, right? And saying, this was hard, this was scary. And they were older kids, they were in middle school. And I said, yeah, I wonder if it could have happened a different way. And they said, yeah, maybe. And then I said, well, I wonder what the first question you'll ask God when you die.
Hmm.
And one of the little children said, well, I'm going to ask him about war and why children get cancer. And then they all began to talk about all the things that are bubbling up in them at that age. And I'm like, wow, those are such great questions. I want to know the answer to those questions too. I hope one day we'll understand. And they were like, yeah. And so that's, I think, one of the big pieces about Godly Play that fills my heart and soul and makes me say, let's approach it this way instead of editing out the parts that we don't like.
Hmm. So if you had to point to one thing that you would like readers to take away from your book, what would you say that it is?
In chapter 8, I include some interviews that I did with children in their late teens, 20s, and 30s who'd already finished Godly Play. They had moved on. They were doing other things. And we asked them many questions about what they remembered about Godly Play, what continued to animate their faith lives now from that experience. And their voices are very compelling. It's amazing what they said and did. So read chapter 8, read the voices of the children. I have direct quotes from several of them that I just think are very powerful and moving.
Testimonies from the alums.
Yeah.
That's great. So are there any future projects, books or otherwise, that you are able to talk about?
Well, right now I have several conferences coming up, where I'm going to go and be speaking about the book. And so that's kind of taking up a lot of my time. But I'm continually out there looking for research projects. I just published a research article called Godly Play Went Home in Religious Education, their journal. And we did some research with families about the impact of Godly Play kind of winging into their homes via the internet during the pandemic. So many Godly Players got super creative. They sent home materials and they offered Godly Play on Zoom. And I was very curious, about, well, what was that like for families to have Godly Play on their kitchen table like that? And, more often, classically, parents drop children off in the room. We're very child focused. We don't invite the parents in, on purposely. We don't want the children to feel like they're being monitored or watched by their parents because we know that can squash things for them. But this was, of course, a very different time. And suddenly parents were sitting there, helping with the technology, unmuting the Zoom so the child could talk. And they had a bird's eye view into watching how the Godly Play mentor was with their children around these stories. And we found it was amazingly important. It was so important for these adults. They said, I'd never seen or experienced or understood it this way. And it woke me up in a way that never had before spiritually and gave my whole family a shared language, to talk about that. So I'm really passionate about finding ways to continue that work, especially as we come back to kind of church as normal. And once again, the children are getting dropped off and the parents are going to church. So how do we keep those parents engaged? And so that's a big interest of mine right now.
Well, it isn't necessarily going to be everybody coming back to church, though, right?
Right.
I mean, all of our denominations have been shrinking, and there's a big population of folks out there that are either ex-church or nuns, but still oftentimes very spiritually interested for their children. So the extent that you can utilize Godly Play and a method that breaks down geographical barriers, doesn't require all us to be in the same location, I think it's incredibly valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. And we agree at the foundation, we're looking for opportunities to do that. And, I'm piloting an idea that I had this fall here at my church called Wonder Fridays. Once a month, families are invited to come and do Godly Play with me on Friday nights. Just moms, dads, kids, whoever's home, right? Grandparents, everyone can come and they go home fed with dinner. And I call it a gentle and open way to nurture your family's spiritual life. So I'm hoping that it might get some traction here in my area. We have a big preschool at my church, 70 families at the church preschool. I'm hoping that some of those folks who, for church, Sunday morning is not their thing, that this might be a gentle way to invite them to nurture their children's spiritual lives and their own spiritual lives.
Good, good. Well, as I mentioned, the title of the book is Godly Play in Middle and Late Childhood. You can learn more about it at godlyplayfoundation.org. So Cheryl, thanks so much for all the important work that you're doing in this area and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Brian. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you.